Little Fiha, who played for Miriam's dance, had a little full mouth which stood out on her round face like a ripe grape. The almond shape of her eyes had been lengthened by an operation, and her pitch-black hair hung in scores of tiny locks over the curves of her shoulders. Ornaments twinkled among the locks, surrounding a comb of white ivory, and a white lotus blossom was fastened to her temple. Her neck ran in long, powerful lines into the breastbone, and her arms, disproportionately long for her figure, were covered, like her naked feet, with rings and other ornaments. A delicate veil of black tulle, sewn with lotus flowers, was thrown about her well-formed body, and the lines of her hips and breasts filtered through its gauze. She rested on one knee as her fingers, with their yellow lacquered nails, swept over the strings of the long hand harp, drawing from it a strange melody. To the restrained tones issuing from the harp, Mary Magdalene appeared before us, surrounded and draped by the rings of smoke from the glowing spices which the young Levites carried in censers. At first she was almost completely veiled from us. Then, as the mists of incense were diffused from round her, she stood revealed. But in what a fantastic likeness! The nakedness of the body was draped in a shower of flame-red hair, and the strands were arranged and woven with such cunning that one would have said she was wearing a glowing tunic. The delicate weave of hair passed through a filter the dark luster of her body. For a moment there was uncovered the fullness of her rounded breast. It vanished, and the next moment afforded a glimpse of the rich flowing back, the strong neck, the sensitive backbone. From the proud, turret-like throat hung, as always, the golden chain which supported Egyptian vials of precious stone filled with intoxicating perfumes. Her head was crowned with a wreath of fresh olive leaves, in the midst of which shone darkly an unknown jewel. Her eyes were ringed with black and artificially lengthened with cosmetics, and on naked feet, glittering with rings, she danced for us to the melody of the harp player and of the young Levites who, kneeling as they held aloft their censers, added their voices to the music. I was told later that this was a national dance of the Jews, a dance in which the women express their love longings for the man of their choice. It embodies in its movements a love song of the people, a song widely beloved and heard on every hand. Tradition ascribed its words to their famous king, Solomon. At one moment in the dance movement, the woman stretched out her hands to her beloved, and her eyes were filled with longing and desire. At another, she hid from him, like a dove taking shelter beneath its own wing, under the cover of her arms. So Miriam danced. Her whole body was caught up in a fever. She writhed in agonizing ecstasy, drunk with the rhythm of melody which poured from the harp strings and the singers. In the intoxication of motion, she seemed to forget our presence and existence, or, if she remembered, she ignored us. She uncovered her breast, her back, her shoulders in the whirlwind of sound. Her mouth became like a sponge which soaks up kisses. Her arms were wound about her in self-embrace. She showered tenderness upon herself. When she began to chant the words of the folk song, and her voice was added to the ecstasy of music and motion and perfumes, we who watched her felt ourselves melt into one dark sea of desire. I glanced at my neighbor, young Hanan, lying on his couch, and I saw his lips tremble. I saw a pallor creep over his pointed nose. I saw his eyelids droop. I glanced at the Babylonian prince, and I saw him consumed in his own fire. I saw the thin, dark face grow thinner. He had closed his eyes. His fists were clenched convulsively, one of them against his temple, to which he pressed a rose as if to cool himself. I glanced at my Ascalonite officer, who stood leaning against a shadowed pillar. He was pale, like the others, but his eyes were wide open, hot and moist, as though they were bathed in burning tears. I glanced at the son of the Jerusalem magnate. He had turned his eyes from the dancer and was staring in wild self-concentration at the black stone in one of his rings. Then something happened which tore us suddenly out of the hot torpor of absorption. At the other end of the hall, a man broke in through the long chain of servants. From the tapping of the staff which he held before him, we perceived at once that he was blind. He was as thin and pallid as a dried root, and his body seemed ready to slip through the tattered sackcloth shirt about it. But the blind, dead face shone as with an inner flame. His bony limbs were sharply chiseled. He tore through the hands of the servants who tried to detain him, thrust forward his bird-like face with its tangled beard, held out his arms in the direction of Miriam and sang, or rather howled, with her the verses of the folk song which referred to her unguents, Lauriach semilnecha hatovim, because of the savour of thy good ointments. We were paralyzed with astonishment. We did not know what had happened. Miriam suddenly suspended her dance and signalled to the house watchman, who approached and explained something to her. And then, incredible as it sounds, instead of breaking out in fury, instead of having the blind beggar flung from the room, she burst into loud and joyous laughter which bordered on hysteria. When she had recovered self-control, she ordered her servants to lead the blind beggar away, to wash and anoint him, to drape him in the finest Phoenician linen, and to bring him back to the banqueting hall. Then, turning to us, she explained, while interrupting herself with the same wild laughter, that this man was a certain Bar Talmai, once an oil mixer, the best in Jerusalem. He caught the perfume of my ointments beyond the gate, and it drove him mad. He always goes mad if the perfume reaches him when he is passing the house, and then he breaks his way in. I hope you will have nothing against it if this unfortunate man takes his place amongst us. God has closed his eyes, but has opened up instead his perception of perfumes. And this extraordinary command was carried out. The servants washed and anointed him. They wrapped him in fine linens. They brought him back and led him to a couch, and they placed before him the most delicate fruits and the rarest wines. But he neither ate nor drank. He hid his face in his hands, breathed heavily, and went on repeating the verses of the folk song. Nor was this all. Nothing would do for Miriam of Migdal, but she must repeat her dance for him. And since he could not see her supple motions, she passed close to him again and again, and from different parts of her veils and hair wafted upon him one perfume after another. They were innumerable and strong. They seemed to carry with them the colour of the flowers from which they were pressed. And as often as her veil showered upon the blind beggar another perfume, he started with a cry of joy. He kissed the air. He stretched out his hands to the perfumes. He seized them. He spread them upon his body as though they were ointments. He spread them upon his face and his eyes, and he babbled his own words, mixed with the words of the song. Who hath comforted me as thou, my modest one, thou chosen of my heart? Thy ointments comfort my heart like the taste of apples. They heal my wounds like a good balm. They wipe away the contumely of the despised. They strengthen the oppressed. See, they stretch out to me thy soft, desirous hands. They caress me as the mother caresses her only child. Sing to me, my beloved. Sing to me of thy perfumes, for now they take me back to the garden of my mother when I was but a child, and my eyes still rejoiced in the light of the sun. I feel now the fresh crocus which blossomed in our garden, and I see the tender buds of the jasmine. So tender and modest and blossoming art thou, so little and so radiant with perfume. Now I am cooled by the wind of field and forest in the hot days of summer. The odor of the lilies of the valley washes me with the dew which falls on the morning rose, and the honey of roses is poured through my skin. Oh, sadden me not with the storm of the cruel iris. Frighten me not with the night of the dark rose, but soften me with the odour of violets, and stay my heart with the dripping honey of myrrh. O sing to me the song of thy ointments." And the blind beggar babbled in ecstatic verses which escaped us. And she, Miriam of Migdal, was wholly occupied with him, and forgot us utterly. Neither by glance nor gesture did she acknowledge our presence in the banqueting hall. She circled widely before the blind one, pouring down alternating perfumes from her veils and tresses, and with him it was as if every change of perfume shot a ray of light into the darkness of his eyes. His open mouth gulped in the laden air, and returned it in cries of happiness, so that in the end the strange spectacle began to fill us with revulsion. I saw the Babylonian prince writhe on his couch, spring to his feet, and lie down again. Young Hanan's eagle nose had become still paler, and it curved in a white ridge over his lips. His eyes had narrowed down to points of flame. I was afraid that he would suddenly leap from his couch, fling himself on the insolent and revolting old beggar, and tear him limb from limb. The same fury and hate burned in the faces of the son of the magnate and of the Ascalon officer. It seemed to me that I heard the furious drumming of envy and loathing in their hearts. So it was with all of us. But Miriam, circling closer and closer about the recumbent, chanting beggar, shielded him from our rage. One by one we left the banqueting hall. First it was the Babylonian prince who snatched up the diadem which had fallen from his brow, and the mantle which lay beside him, and called to his servant with a loud, impatient cry. But Miriam paid not the slightest attention to him. Then followed the priestly scions, the Ascalonite, myself. If she was aware of our going, then her frenzied dancing hastened our departure. We left her alone with the blind, ecstatic singing old man. The next morning, happening to pass through the court of the Gentiles, I saw her in the company of a woman-servant near a booth of sacrificial doves. She was veiled from head to foot like a vestal. I paused to wait until she had completed her purchase. A long time passed before she found a pair of doves to please her. When she caught sight of me, she drew her veil hastily over the blue iridescent heads of the birds, which she was holding most lovingly to her bosom, as if she was afraid that my glance would defile her offering. I approached her and said something concerning the incident of the preceding night, but she did not let me finish my remark. She made a vague gesture of acknowledgment and farewell, and turned from me. I followed her at a little distance to the entrance of the women's court. At the gate of Corinthian bronze, she put off her outer veil, and donned another handed her by her servant. Doubtless she felt that the words I had spoken had contaminated her garment. She then lifted the veil, which covered the doves to hide her own face. A twig of incense in one hand, she disappeared with little singing steps behind the gate of the women's court.